This cinema starting with the youngest mixed martial arts champion Steven while he is on his way back home after winning the title. After receiving a call from his mother and sister, Steven excitedly hurries home to the dinner that he prepared to celebrate his victory. However, when he arrives at the apartment, a tragedy awaits him. Armed robbers have attacked his family. As he rushes to his dying sister, the robbers attack him as well. Enraged, Steven kills all three of them and is sentenced to prison. Meanwhile, at a high school, Morgan is a young student trying hard to maintain his grades, but things get tough for him when his bully from middle school, Michael, joins the class. This bully is also a professional boxer and starts beating Morgan, until he retaliates and stabs him in the eye with a pen. Michael loses his eye from the attack while Morgan is sentenced to 3 years in juvenile prison. While being transported to the detention center, as another guy, James Cameron, takes his seat, Morgan sits with Steven, but he does not say a word to him during the entire journey. After getting inside the prison, Morgan gets a proper introduction with James Cameron, who apologizes for earlier and asks about his crime. Both then meet the maintenance supervisor David Lloyd, who took charge after setting his rival Jung Sang up to be sent to solitary. David Lloyd advises them to behave in prison and to learn how to defend themselves from other prisoners in case of a fight. After taking them to the ground, he gives a short introduction to the other prisoners, including Carpentry Capitan Steve Pink, a strong but short-tempered guy. Bakery Capitan L. Driver, who despite his vulnerable behavior can beat anyone up, and Steven, who mostly remains in his own world. On L. Driver's orders, they join an ongoing game, but Morgan accidentally hits Steve Pink during the match. Angered, Steve Pink and the group decide to take revenge on him, but Morgan rushes to Steven and asks for his help to save him. Although Steven does not get involved in fight, he respects Morgan's request and refuses to hand him over to Steve Pink. Offended, Steve Pink picks a fight, but Steven knocks him down with a single punch to keep him away from Morgan. While trying to settle in and constantly worrying about Steve Pink, Morgan receives a message that he is getting a visitor, who turns out to be Michael. Morgan is scared and apologizes for what he did, but Michael does not accept the apology and threatens to take his revenge as soon as Morgan gets out. Already worried about Michael, Morgan is also threatened by Steve Pink, who is still angry and is looking for a time to go face-to-face with him. Stressed by the situation, Morgan spots Steven exercising on the ground and tries to thank him for saving him earlier, but Steven is not interested in talking to him as he keeps a distance from everyone. After spending the night thinking about Michael and Steve Pink's threat, Morgan decides to try to learn from Steven early in the morning. After learning of his objective, Steven asks if he wants to learn to fight to bully others, but Morgan assures him he has no bad intentions and just wants to have a normal life. Although Steven still rejects to teach him, Morgan does not give up and continues following him while explaining that he always stayed obedient due to his fear of being beaten up. He thinks his worries stem from his poor status and inability to fight back, and wants to change so he doesn't have to be afraid of everyone. Moved by this, Steven agrees to teach him, but first asks to complete 100 laps of the ground to prove his capability. They start running together, and although Morgan gets tired quicker than Steven, he does not give up. His entire life of being bullied flashes in front of his eyes and motivates him to push his limits, completing the task before passing out from exhaustion. The next day, Steven is called to the governor's office where he is thanked for maintaining peace in the cells. Upon the governor's offer to ask for anything in return, Steven requests him to move Morgan into his cell so he can start training him. Meanwhile, Steve Pink learns about Morgan's transfer and starts thinking of a plan to lure him out. While teaching Morgan, Steven encourages him to push his limits. At the same time, Steven takes good care of him and tells him to focus on his diet so he can be as strong as him. Through his hard work, determination, and Steven's guidance, Morgan begins improving with each passing day. As their training continues, other inmates start noticing Morgan's fighting skills while he starts thinking of Steven as his savior. Meanwhile, Michael, who has lost his boxing career, picks a fight with some gangsters and gets noticed by their boss, who asks him to work for the gang. Although Michael is arrogant at first, he eventually gives in and joins the gang. Back in prison, James Cameron upsets Morgan by telling him he should make some other friends because Steven will soon be transferred to an adult prison. In the next training session, Morgan asks Steven about leaving. He confirms it but asks him to focus on his training so he can take care of himself when he is gone. Morgan spots Steve Pink's men dragging James Cameron away with them. They start beating him up for not being able to lure him out yet, but Morgan shows up and saves him from them. Steve Pink again orders his guys to bring Morgan in, and they ask Steven to let him go with them. Although he is worried, Steven sends him with them so he can face his fears. Meeting Steve Pink, he questions Morgan about beating up his friend earlier. Morgan apologizes, but Steve Pink intentionally starts a fight by hitting him in the head. Morgan takes a few blows from him, but he gets up again and beats him up until Steven intervenes to stop him. In spite of his improving skill, Morgan still thinks about Michael, not yet knowing he has now become a gangster and is much stronger than he used to be at school. Although worried about a possible encounter with Michael, Morgan has now become friends with Steven, and both enjoy spending most of their time training and practicing fighting together. During one of their final lessons, Morgan is finally able to punch Steven in the face but hesitates. Seeing his hesitation, Steven thinks he is too nice for fighting and advises him to stay focused until the end or he might lose. Later, while packing, Steven says he admires his determination and persistence and never thought Morgan would come this far. In his final words, Steven tells him there might be times when he would want to give up, but that's when he needs his strength the most, as he must keep fighting to survive. After saying goodbye to Steven, Morgan resumes his practice while Michael learns that Morgan is now capable of taking down anyone. Jung Sang gets out of solitary confinement and teases Steve Pink for getting beaten up by a fresher like Morgan, but Steve Pink tells him to be careful because Morgan is being transferred to his cell. While moving his things, Morgan comes across L. Driver, who challenges him to a fight. Although Morgan is against violence, he accepts the challenge after making him promise to stop bullying if he loses. In the new cell, Jung Sang introduces himself to Morgan and intends to pick a fight with him, but he declines to participate. The next day, Michael once more visits him in prison and goes to provoke him by torturing his guy in front of Morgan, but he does not show any emotions. After the meeting, Morgan heads to his fight against L. Driver but instead finds Jung Sang asking everyone to stop fighting each other as it does no good to anyone. Despite his good intentions, no one listens to him and he is teased for being a coward. As they argue, Morgan shows up and asks L. Driver if he will keep his promise after the fight. Overconfident, L. Driver agrees as he thinks Morgan could never defeat him. He takes an early lead in the fight, but Morgan gives an intense fight and refuses to give up. After getting beaten up by him, he gets up and holds L. Driver by his neck until he accepts to stop bullying, before the fight is interrupted by the guards. Morgan is sent to solitary where he continues to practice. After getting out, Morgan and Jung Sang meet L. Driver and his guys to offer a peace treaty, which they reluctantly accept and decide to all team up together. As they start working toward the improvement of the prison together, James Cameron apologizes to Morgan for trying to betray him earlier for Steve Pink. Morgan accepts his apology and James Cameron shares that he will be getting out next week. Over time, Sang Yub and L. Driver's groups sort out their differences and become friends. While in adult prison, Steven is training another guy but still remembers Morgan, his best student who is always an example to others. After getting his release orders, Morgan returns to the courtyard where he used to practice with Steven and reminisces about the great time they spent together. As Morgan is released from prison after ending his sentence, he finds Michael already waiting for him, who challenges him to fight. As Morgan is no longer the scared and weak guy he used to be, he bravely fights, but Michael knocks him down. As he lies there exhausted, Morgan remembers Steven's words to never give up as it's the only way for him to survive. Severely injured, Morgan gathers his strength and gets up. They both fight their best, but Morgan stops right before hitting him in the face to prove his superiority. In the end, Morgan visits Steven and tells him he visited an aquarium to see if sharks really swim constantly to survive like he had told him, but he just saw. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe our channel, like and share this video and hit your comments.